Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for joining us. Before we begin, the session is recorded and everybody is in listen-only mode, but if you have questions, just add them to the questions pane and then we'll reply at the end of the webinar. I'm Hella Schwartz-Grossman, Marketing Manager at Worldox, and I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today, Ari Kaplan. He will discuss the future of litigation workflow, best practices for navigating disputes in a post-pandemic era, and share perspectives from his recent research and report with the American LegalNet. Ari Kaplan is an attorney and legal industry analyst. He's an inaugural Fastcase 50 honoree, a fellow of the College of Law Practice Management, and a finalist for ILTA's Thought Leader of the Year Award. He's the author of Reinventing Professional Services, Building Your Business in the Digital Marketplace, and The Opportunity Maker, Strategies for Inspiring Your Legal Career Through Creative Networking and Business Development. Ari also serves as the principal researcher for a variety of widely distributed benchmarking reports. He hosts a virtual lunch daily on Zoom, and he has been the keynote speaker for events worldwide and is the founder of the Lawcountability business development software platform and iPhone app. And now, Ari, handing it over to you.
I'm honored to be here, and I just want everyone to know that when we started this, I said, "Oh, Hella, will you introduce me, or should I introduce her?" She's like, "No," and I thought she was just going to come up with something, but she had that fantastically planned introduction, and I appreciate it. And I'm just so glad to be here working with my friends at Worldox, and I appreciate the opportunity to get a chance to talk about this research. I always tell people that I get to do lucky work, and this report is such a great example of that. Imagine that I get the chance to talk to practice group leaders at the world's largest law firms about what their challenges are, how they're navigating them. My kids can't quite understand this because, I'm basically cold calling people that I don't know to say, "Hey, would you give me an hour of your time and tell me all these little secrets about your practice?" But I feel very lucky that I get to do it, and they trust me that I'm not going to reveal who they are. But generally, this report was designed to give people a chance to talk about their workflow, how litigation is changing. As everyone knows, we are in this unusual period. We are coming out of an unusual period. We are entering an unusual period. This is in some ways a litigation limbo. And we have been trying to figure out what are the best ways to navigate. And American LegalNet was generous to commission this report to try to figure out, where does technology fit? How are we reimagining what tools we're using and the processes that we are applying in moving forward? And so it's great that we get to talk about this with the friends of Worldox, because there's a real alignment in terms of innovative companies that are trying to figure out how to best serve their clients in any kind of market, in any kind of situation. I'm happy to share any of the infographics that I'm going to show today, and I would welcome questions. I know that everyone's muted, but please feel free to enter questions. If I don't see them, I know the team at Worldox will see them, and then maybe they'll just interrupt. They're welcome to do that. I love anybody who's ever seen me live knows that I'm happy to have some interaction, and I look forward to it. So this is meant to just give you a good sense of who I spoke to, what were some key statistical takeaways, and as I mentioned, 100% of them were from large law firms. Generally, very, very large law firms. 82% were the actual leader of their practice group, and 74%, are with firms that have more than 500 lawyers, which means that not all of them were at that size. But really, the understanding was I wanted to get a sense of where there's a high litigation profile. 79% said they've changed the way they've used technology. Now, as a qualifier, generally everyone has changed the way they've used technology because they are using video and other collaboration tools in ways that they hadn't before. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine today, because when I used to do conference calls, you may remember this era of conference calls, which sort of doesn't exist anymore because everything is based on video now. But somebody would call in and they'd say, "Hi, Susan. Hi, Bob. And people just, Bob's calling. Bing, Bob's calling." And I'd always say, "Ari Kaplan," and that would record. And then they'd say, "Entering the call, Ari." And it was super funny. It was just like, I guess there were some situations that were too serious. I shouldn't have done that, but I did it anyway. I guess just my personality. But the point is, 79% said technology has changed. I think there was another group, about a fifth of people who were like, "Yeah, it's not really that different." And that distinction and the way people are defining change and the use of technology, very interesting. I should tell you that I am in the midst of finalizing a companion report, and I can only hope Worldox invites me back to talk about the corporate perspective. So American LegalNet has asked me to ask litigation leaders at large corporations if this is in sync. Fascinating combination. I feel incredibly fortunate to get to do that. So more than half are allocating higher budgets at firms, and 42% said that they've increased their use of mobile applications for litigation. More and more, you're seeing, because people are working remotely, because people are in this hybrid environment, that they're starting to take advantage of ways to do their work from wherever they are. 91% talked about the benefits of remote litigation. What does that look like? For many people, this idea that you no longer have to fly somewhere, that you no longer even have to leave your home or office to engage, has been tremendous. And a lot of people talked about that, the work-life balance, the ability to have your cake and eat it too. I always say that, like, my objective in life, have my cake and eat it too. Somehow have really fulfilling career, do really meaningful work, get to work with amazing people, all of the, and in any other thing that I'm looking for, right? Like, and be able to be at my son's baseball game or my daughter's basketball game, right? All of those things combined. How do we do that? And I think that was one of the features, particularly for litigators who have a very challenging schedule in comparison to, and a little bit of erratic schedule in comparison to other practice areas. 52% talked about transitioning staff to this remote world was their biggest challenge last year. What's been interesting is that as the time has gone on, and I've asked corporate leaders, they have different challenges and would talk about different challenges from last year. Frankly, one of the things that people talked about in terms of surprises is just how great everything went. Honestly, they couldn't believe how quickly their teams adapted, how easily they were able to serve their clients. The only challenge is generally in the areas they can't control: the nature of the court system, access to decision makers, things like that. But for the most part, the biggest surprises are often just about how seamless, in the midst of total chaos and uncertainty, things have gone. From a risk management standpoint, so you can see I asked 4 different things. I asked about working remotely, I asked about technology, risk management, and the future, just to give people a sense of looking ahead. Almost 80% talked about their law firms using a docketing software tool from a risk management standpoint. This is critical when you're thinking about it, because a lot of people talked about the risks of deadlines, the challenges of meeting certain deadlines as a result of people working in so many different places and relying on technology in a way that is just much more significant than before. About a third of them said that remote work makes managing those deadlines more challenging, and similar number have seen an increase in terms of the risk of administrative errors, calendaring errors, things like that. From a future looking standpoint, which for me is a compelling point, almost 80% talked about transformation. 2/3 talked about that the volume is going to increase, and then about half are moving their litigation management to the cloud. In fact, more than half. So this element is a really critical piece, and I think it's worth emphasizing several times. So one of the things that I try to capture in all of my research are perspectives. There's a lot of data points. it's certainly quantitative, but the hallmark of the work that I do is that I am interviewing people directly. These are conversations because I have found over the years that you often learn just as much in the pause, the laughter, the sigh as you do in the actual answer. In fact, I will often note, in brackets, laughter when when I'm filling things out, when I'm notating it, because if I see that when I ask a question about something, about the use of technology, proficiency, the development of certain processes, the application of certain protocols, the regulatory environment, whatever the issue might be, that I get laughter or long pause, I know that this is a particularly key issue that I otherwise would not be able to determine if I was simply asking people to check boxes. But these are some of the key points, right? The remote environment makes us more likely to work across the firm because you're not necessarily beholden to just who's there. In the past, it was convenient to go next door, look across the hall, maybe go downstairs. But now, in a lot of organizations, it's just as easy to engage with the person who used to work next door if they're not in the office as talk to someone across the country or around the world, and that has been a real benefit. The other corollary, there's sort of the issue, the counter issue is that being in person, and as I'm listening, so as I articulated the advantage of listening rather than just reading check boxes, seeing is better than listening for a lot of organizations, right? So seeing the client, gauging the witness almost in the environment of the room. Lots of people have told me that from a mediation standpoint, for example, much easier to get to resolution if you're on, hour 10 in a cold room, or you're stuck eating vending machine snacks or something, and recognize that you aren't that far apart, and so waiting isn't going to add much benefit for either side, and you want to come to consensus, as opposed to hour in a breakout room, take a break, you're on your couch. The incentive, the structural challenges don't exist, which delays the process. It may push some of that forward and change the timing in a way that isn't as valuable. So the remote work had this kind of push-pull of what was working. From a risk manager standpoint, I mentioned that closer attention to calendaring, deadlines. There are so many more endpoints, the reliance on reaching people, sometimes getting in touch with them. Some of this is being alleviated by the fact that many organizations are increasingly back in the office, but they're back in the office on a different basis than prior to the March of 2020. It's still erratic. People still generally aren't in all the time, all together. So these challenges linger, and that was one of the things that came out. And then it was just sort of rethinking deadlines, adding redundancy, building alerts, and that was another thing that kind of came out from a risk management standpoint. And there's an expectation: if my peers are doing this, I should be doing this, and that was something that came out. People talked about using their phones. People talked about also figuring out any possible way that you can leverage technology to use technology. Also, how can we expand the way that we're using our existing platforms that came out, and where does the balance come from in terms of working from home, when we work, where does technology fit in? From a future standpoint, data analytics, how are you using that? That was a big issue with the law department leaders that I spoke to. So it should be a big issue with legal organizations. There are some key areas: cyber attacks, investigation and enforcement, restructuring related litigation is where people see things headed. And frankly, this whole experience has proven that there are multiple ways to work and multiple locations in which that work can be accomplished. The question now will be when the courts ultimately return in a uniform fashion and hopefully even more efficiently than in the past. And there are a number of jurists who are just remarkably adept at technology and who are really pushing this transformation, whether it's for access to justice or to facilitate commercial disputes, facilitate the resolution of commercial disputes. The hope that this will turn out and result in more efficient systems is something that a lot of people talked about. So I asked people to give me some some information in terms of like what word they would use to describe litigation workflow. And you can see here, efficient, different, delayed, remote, virtual, patience, digital, stalled, and then like little tiny ones: access, novel, slow, getting better, kind of, tentative, comfortable, sometimes too comfortable, from from the standpoint of, are people dressing formally? Are they logging in a few minutes early? Is there time to really convey their points? I think there was a lot of that. So this came up. And then one of the things that I wanted to remark on here is that following the release of this research, I was very lucky to host a Zoom discussion. I can only hope that we get to do it in person soon, but hosted a Zoom discussion with many different litigation leaders at the most prominent firms in the country, not necessarily participants in this research, but just leaders who are making litigation related decisions about some of these issues. And so I share this with you because yet another way to, in many ways, validate the data, because this came up following the data based on the report, and a lot of interesting takeaways here from an efficiency standpoint, from the use of mobile devices and the cloud, what's changing in litigation. So I think that there's a lot here, and I'll kind of bring them together with some of the different data points. I want to just pause for a second to see if there are any questions. So feel free to pop this in. I don't know if anybody's thinking of anything, but if you do, I'm happy to follow up.
Actually, Ari, I've heard from a couple of lawyers that they've ended up having to do some interesting travel during the pandemic, and I'm wondering if you had heard that this was occurring. But one of them is a patent attorney whose client insisted, despite the pandemic, on meeting in person. And the client was from another country, and they weren't allowed into the US, and he wasn't allowed to go there. So they had to meet in something like Aruba, like every other month, so that they could have their meetings. So I'm just wondering whether clients' needs, like how the clients' needs were during this time, and whether you did any research on that, like whether the clients were handling this, or were they making demands that were, a little bit crazy like that.
Well, that's a great example of having your cake and eating it too, frankly. I wouldn't have any problem meeting any client in Aruba, particularly that outside counsel is probably, the travel is covered. I will say that I have only generally heard that one of the key benefits of remote litigation is not traveling, and certainly not wasted travel that people felt like could be replicated meaningfully in a remote environment. Certainly there are instances where you need to travel, but as you say, there have been, up until recently, so many restrictions that logistically it became really challenging. But any lawyer that I spoke to who's leading any kind of practice group at any of the firms that were kind to share their thoughts would go anywhere the clients needed them to go. So there has been no dilution of client service in this instance. It's just that people have figured out you can work remotely and accomplish many, many things remotely. And in fact, while remote trials are unlikely to become the primary way that cases are handled, certainly there is an appetite in a number of instances for many different kinds of disputes for remote mediation, remote arbitration, some appellate arguments. There's definitely been an interest in seeing how that expands. The day-to-day litigation, the sort of arguments, the areas where you'd want to be in court for some of those things, people are still hoping that, the court's open and that there's a capacity for some of those things. But going forward, my sense is that there are a number of things that have shifted and probably will not ever return to their former technique.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some of these comments so these are not comments from the report, they're comments from the follow-up discussion. And at a time we thought business would crater, we had the best year ever. Very, very common point. I don't need to tell you that. It's been all over the news. Working from home, I thought that was an oxymoron. Like, who's working when they're home? But in fact, it's that's another thing, a myth that's been busted in many ways. And certainly there's a risk issue. So when I'm talking about risk management, that concept of working from home, people may be working on a organization's device filled with the kind of security protections, but somebody may transfer something to their phone, to their kid's iPad. I think it's funny actually when I sign on to Zoom every once in a while and the name is like clearly not that person's name because a child, a spouse, a friend, someone else was using that computer, and so the risk tolerance was different. So I asked a bunch of questions about this. Has your team enjoyed the benefits of remote litigation? You see, it's just overwhelming. You don't even have to look at the numbers. You can just look at the charts here. Have you faced setbacks? Yes. Both, as I discussed, work-life balance, setbacks, we're just not moving things. Things are just not moving. And so you're finding that there's tremendous value now in the professionals who can expedite this concept of a litigation expediter has become of paramount importance because there needs to be this incredible seamless communication between the courts, the adversaries, the experts. You need to really centralize this and figure out who can do this best. Has it transformed litigation? Sure. Is it going to remain permanent? It will be permanent in some instances. It is unlikely that firms will be traveling as much for the kinds of things they used to travel for. Will people travel as much? Maybe. They just may travel for more valuable items, or as you mentioned, Rebecca, maybe in lieu of a trip to a fairly unimportant fact witness or something that can be taken via Zoom, that trip will then now be taken to see the client or to meet with an expert in a way that's going to just have much more material impact. Have you changed the way you use technology? Yes. Again, big numbers, significant, overwhelming agreement, not many surprises from the standpoint of what there was a lot of shared experience here, and I think the data really bears that out. Technology. Firms used to be afraid of the cloud because of security concerns. Now that's what's driving firms to the cloud, right? Speed and scale of cloud solutions are forcing clients to adopt them, and then as we start to travel more, we'll increase our use of mobile applications for litigation. So what was interesting about the technology questions, if you ask the question, has technology impacted litigation? Have you changed the way? Answer is, of course, yes, and a double yes. But The more fascinating area to study is what will that mean going forward? And so when this individual said, as we start to travel more, we'll increase our use of mobility, people are, there's a couple of things going on. So there's this remote movement, and then there's being like it's not quite working kind of on the fly. And I think that they're different. I think that this impression of working remotely has become kind of working from home or working from a location other than the office, as opposed to being back in this kind of cat in the hat world where you're juggling and balancing. And what will that look like? And will there be ways that will protect us from either making mistakes or being hacked, and what will that look like? So there was a kind of a line drawn between some of these things, and there were interesting discussions. I don't want to give away too much of the great stuff that's in the report. It's free to download and you're welcome to look at it, but here are some of the key points. How has the importance of technology changed in light of the pandemic? It's just like much more important. And one thing that I will point out from a comparative standpoint, I didn't get this overwhelming, it's much more important from the in-house litigation leaders. So it'll be interesting when I put these different data points side by side, law firm leaders, in-house leaders. Is your practice group using technology differently to manage litigation? Kind of yes and no. We are, except we are always investing in technology, and there was a little bit of a shift there. Has it increased your use of mobile apps? Sure. And are you moving more of your litigation management to the cloud? And the point here was, are you pushing more of not just the dates and deadlines, the ability to seamlessly interact, the ability to pull up on a dashboard your litigation profile, where things are, just a centralized, if you can imagine, screens everywhere where you have every bit of information that you could possibly want. And are you centralizing it all in a single place? That is certainly happening, at least for a majority of the people that I spoke to. So from a risk management standpoint, more data visualization. This is a great point. Attorneys are so risk averse that it's historically been hard to be innovation first, but that's changed. And that's something that has come up a lot. Hella was kind to mention that I am the host of something I created called the Virtual Lunch. And this is a topic that's come up regularly in terms of innovation, the appetite for innovation. And I have some other research that'll be coming out focused on those challenges and those opportunities. And the courts, the courts are a big variable here. Mediators, arbitrators, that side of decision making and dispute resolution is thriving, and there are lots of developments occurring. But in the courts, while they are operating in some sense remotely, they're not generally operating optimally and at a level that they used to. So we'll see what happens as more people get comfortable being together, or as they get more comfortable expanding and advancing their use of technology. And here again, has the pandemic made it more challenging to manage your deadlines? Pretty big number, a third of folks. And do you have a docketing software tool? Giant number, almost 80%. This is actually very good benchmarking data, which is why I share it. Most people have a docketing tool. Great. Do we? How does it work? Is it helpful? Has it made it more challenging to manage deadlines? For a lot of people, it has. Has it for your organization? What does that actually mean? How do we identify that? Who do we speak to? The other thing I also talk to from a risk manager standpoint is that do people know how they're operating in this environment? Are you conducting training remotely? Almost everyone. And frankly, almost everyone was doing that before. Of course, then it became the only way. And this is another thing that we've talked about on the virtual lunch. So the virtual lunch is actually a Zoom call. I host it every day from noon to 1 Eastern. If you're listening, you're invited. I have made it completely public. We have guests at least once a week. It's just been a fascinating experience, a wonderful community of supportive folks. We talk about every possible issue that there is, and this idea of how we conduct training, what remote presentations are like, virtual events versus live events, just constantly coming up. Firms are clearly doing this. It's getting better. It's getting more engaging. Not as engaging as this particular discussion, but engaging. And, are those programs effective? Yeah, they're effective. I mean, certainly they were effective compared to nothing, but people, I feel like, have gotten a better sense of how to look into the camera and really make eye contact and try to have some good sound and stand against a brick wall. Like, they figured out some things that will maybe make it more engaging. Here's a good example. You may not find this valuable at all, but I always stand for any Zoom call generally, unless I'm interviewing someone for my research. I always stand. I find that it's just better for my energy, for my breathing, and just my ability to look at you and engage. Things like that, techniques like that, have really evolved over the past couple of years. And I just think that's great for everyone, because who wants to listen to some boring, even though you're like, oh my God, I'm totally listening to some boring discussion and this guy's telling me no. But the point is, are you conducting training well? They are. All right, let's talk a little bit about the future of litigation. One of the things that came up on this Zoom call was efficiency. So when we're thinking about it, if you were to whittle it down, it would be this alignment in many ways of technology and of risk management and efficiency. How do we kind of align all of these different factors? So an increase in remote work leads to greater efficiencies. There's less wasted time. That's very true. Video collaboration and mediation has been incredible. People talked about how effective it's been. Careful not to use technology for everything. And so that's going to be the issue going forward. The balancing act. When is it appropriate? When isn't it appropriate? What's our highest and best use? In what instances should we avoid travel? In what instances should we advocate for being on site in person? And part of that needs to be a self-evaluation. A lot of people talked about this idea of being honest with yourself. Litigators are in many ways like professional athletes. They have this gift. They excel at storytelling in front of a group. And so there's this idea that I'm better in front of an audience. They react. I can see them. They smile at me. I smile back. And yet, in many instances, you don't need to have someone smile at you, smile back. You have a good point. You make it. It's persuasive. And so there needs to be this idea of, is this valuable enough to go through all of the expense? Is that difference between doing it in a remote way and getting there, is that little difference, if it is a little difference, is that enough to push you to make that effort? And that will often be a discussion between the client and the practitioner and the practitioner's team. And in many ways, both will be reasonable. Clients want the best representation that they can get. And obviously, legal teams want to represent their clients in a way that will lead to the best outcome, whatever that is for the client. But the future is very much going to be about greater communication and an understanding that one side can't determine this. The firm is generally not going to say, we have to do this. They'll advise, and the client will often trust the advice of the firm, which is why they hire them. But the client will also ask a few more questions. Is this really necessary? What do you think will come out of this if you do make this effort and go to this expense? And there will likely be more accountability. So you said that this is what would happen. We went this direction. What do you think? And then, ultimately, when I asked people, do you expect the volume of litigation to increase, decrease, remain the same this year? Most of them said they see it increasing or remaining the same. If you total this increase or remain the same, you're talking about 80+% of people don't see a decline. Some people thought it would decline. Obviously, the backlog is an issue, And the real question is not necessarily what's going to happen this year or next year. The real question is, how do you see the trajectory of litigation 2023? That is a variable that is actually distinct between law firms and their clients. So again, it'll be interesting to compare the different pieces of research. I'm happy to take questions. I'm also happy to just share responses to some of the questions that I've received over the course of talking about this research, and just in terms of sharing these thoughts in different formats. So I'll leave it up to my friends at Worldox, but I don't know, have any questions come in?
We have not had any questions come in, but if you
I have questions because I always do.
No question. That's such a surprise on a webinar. No questions. It's incredible. So
I actually always have questions. So I have a question for you because I just got off of. I did a workshop at LegalSec just last week, and the session that I did all about the future of the hybrid workplace. And one of the things that a lot of people talked about in that workshop was that you had mentioned training, and that there was a lot more, there was definitely a lot of training, and it's not like people weren't doing training before, but what they discovered is that maybe a lot of the lawyers who relied on their staff to do a lot of things in the past had to learn how to do those things themselves, because now they were at home and very much, apart from their staff who would ordinarily be helping them. So I was wondering whether you had talked to anybody about that. And then the other thing that I learned is that a lot of the staff of law firms, like, for example, one firm that I spoke to, their AV staff, they ended up having to sort of beef up that staff because those people ended up being sort of in control of helping everybody with their Zoom meetings and all of that sort of thing. And so the support for that became even more important and more critical, and more people needed to know how to do that. So I'm just wondering whether you found the same thing or whether that came up in your research.
So there's so many things to unpack here, and I'm so glad you asked this question. I always think of my research this way. So when I was a kid, my dad, who was an amazingly handy individual, just super bright man, he used to always ask me to hold the flashlight. So when I was a kid, no matter what my dad did, he'd be like, Ari, come, I need you to hold the flashlight. And I hated doing this. I'd hold the flashlight. It was really annoying. And sometimes I'd hold a flashlight in a perfectly lit room. I would hold the flashlight. As I got older, I realized I'm holding the flashlight outside. And it took me a while, but I realized my dad never needed me to hold the flashlight. He actually just wanted me to see what he was doing so that I would learn myself. And I'm a big teach someone to fish rather than give them a fish, just in terms of raising my teenagers. And so I think that, yes, this situation has made a lot of individuals more self-sufficient. Whether they want to or not is something different. Whether they will continue to be self-sufficient is something different. It's also had the wonderful impact of elevating many different kinds of roles. So people who are willing to adapt and learn and take ownership of some situation or become better at something from a technical standpoint or a process standpoint than their peers are those that were relied upon over this period, changed the impression that one might have of them over the course of this period, and really worked to their favor. So I totally agree that there was a lot more self-reliance. And I also think that the wonderful byproduct of that lack of a central resource in some respects, or an overwhelmed central resource, is that others were given the chance to step up and showcase their own talent and ability to be an even more supportive member of their teams. It gave them in many ways a seat at the table. I've often talked about the fact that the virtual environment allows for a bigger table, so there are more seats, and there's greater opportunity for people to sit at that table and to share their views and to be of service. And that's not necessarily just internally you see a lot of firms and individuals at firms and leaders of groups like the ones I spoke to who were offering the resources that they had to their clients. And that was a really just, a wonderful combination and opportunity to collaborate that I certainly hope, and a number of the people that I spoke with hope, will continue even when that may not be as necessary going forward.
So I was also wondering, when you were talking about firms that were using docketing software, I'm wondering whether you know how many of them had that software before the pandemic, or how many of them implemented it because of the pandemic.
Great question. So I did not ask them when they acquired their docketing platforms. I do know from the research that docketing software is a critical component of almost all of the groups that I spoke to, that the value for them is significant, that their clients, and I'm basing this on the interviews I've done with the corporate litigation leaders, the clients are relying on their firms to track those things and to be perfect about it. The risk management factors that I raised are even more important because there is such a strong reliance on the firms that if there are issues with deadlines or certain risk factors from administrative errors, from a calendaring standpoint, it's heightened because there is this reliance and there's this expectation, and if that is not in sync, it creates challenges. So there is a significant value placed on the ability to track and manage litigation in the most effective way possible.
Yeah, I've actually, some of the, what I know about docketing software, I don't know, is somewhat minimal, and it's been several years since I've had to deal with it at a law firm. But I do know that not all systems are created equal, and the ones that have done more automation with regards to the court rules and keeping up with them and things like that are the ones that are going to address those risks a lot more. And I know that I've also known enough docketing people that some of them like to modify and tweak some of those rules to their own uses, and sometimes that interferes with those processes as well. But anyway, yeah, so it just makes me wonder whether people reevaluated and switched due to the pandemic.
One thing that they may have done, to your point, is tried to explore the different features, the ability to have distribute the nature in which the data is presented, or to holistically evaluate what's in the system and what kinds of items are upcoming, and how can we dispose of certain matters and when. So there was a much greater analysis. So robust tools that give that opportunity were of significant value. And I asked a variety of questions in the report about, can you view things this way? Does your team expect this? Is it in the cloud? Is it remote? Is there a dedicated app for this tool or that tool? And there was a lot of interesting research that came out of it. And as you can see on the screen, I share this URL, alncorp.com/future-of-litigation-workflow. And of course, I put on the screen a QR code to my LinkedIn profile. I'd love to link in with people. And if you have questions, please email Ari at arikaplanadvisors.com. I would be happy to answer them and share all the infographics that I have presented. And certainly you can download a copy of the report.
Okay. All right. Ari, this has been very, very good. I'm so happy you were able to share all the information with us. And we thank you. And as mentioned, we did record this session, so we'll post it. And anyone who registered will automatically get a copy. But, go and take a look at the website, and we'll post it again. And we hope everybody will join us again for a future one, and also make sure to check out Ari's virtual lunch session. Join him.
Thank you. Yes, it's at you can find the Zoom link at avirtuallunch.com. Thanks for mentioning that, Hella. And thanks so much to Worldox for giving me this opportunity, and of course to American LegalNet and all the folks who were kind to share their views with me for the research. I'm grateful to everyone.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.